Our story begins with an angel who never imagined that, after granting man absolute power, he would be received with a ruthless punch. Before he could beg for mercy, his wings were cruelly torn away, for the man knew this holy-looking angel was actually a slaughter-loving psychopath, and that humans were nothing more than livestock raised by God, slowly evolving within the prison we call Earth. But one day, God grew tired of feeding these ants and decided to exterminate humanity with this apocalyptic game. However, a variable occurred. While everyone else prostrated themselves, the man who was meant to be a puppet killed the divine messenger. Just a moment ago, he had secured first place in the deadly trial, and although the reward was generous, he wasn't satisfied with that alone. He asked the angel for an extra reward, but he had barely finished speaking when a clear murderous intent flashed in the angel's eyes. To be honest, the celestial being could not tolerate being challenged by a mere ant. He was about to raise his hand to annihilate him, but discovered he had already used his authority, so he decided to do it personally. He had to avoid being seen, of course, because if the higher-ups found out, he would face a severe punishment. But the angel had no idea that all of this was a trap the man had carefully laid for him. To dispel any lingering distrust, the angel soon led him into a small, secluded forest. He turned around and offered a kind smile, never expecting a violent punch to suddenly slam into his face. The sheer force of the blow sent him crashing to the ground. The angel was in complete disbelief, but the man gave him no time to process what was happening. He reached out directly, grabbed the angel's wings, and with grim determination, ripped them right off. His purpose was simple. By losing his wings, the angel would be unable to flee, as the man knew the creature despised humans deeply. He was also well aware that the angel's annihilation ability could only be used once per day, and so, he had deliberately provoked him, luring the divine messenger here to his death. The angel let out a soul-piercing scream, begging to be let go. He promised additional absolute power, but before he could finish his plea, his head rolled across the ground. Our protagonist knew all too well the deep-seated contempt these angels felt for humans, right down to their very marrow. 1,000 reincarnations had passed, and 1,000 times, everything had ended in utter disaster. He had witnessed their hypocrisy firsthand, and all of this was done simply to be the first to kill an angel. By doing so, he would claim the only hidden reward and the ultimate achievement. Congratulations were in order, as he had become the first trespasser to eliminate a guide angel. He had earned the exclusive hidden achievement, Godslayer. As a reward, he received the EIS and salve, the raiment of angelic blood. This was the great secret he had uncovered after 1,000 lifetimes of searching. This flask of blood would finally awaken his hidden talent, death. Whoever possesses it gains a power directly connected to the very essence of mortality. And as the talent gradually awakens within him, new and terrifying abilities will slowly begin to unlock. The first phase is the Eye of Death, which allows him to see the weaknesses and fatal trajectories of every living thing. The higher phase abilities remained locked for now, which was to be expected, but he knew that the ultimate form of the death talent was a power capable of tearing through dimensional planes. However, he understood perfectly well that now was not the time to lose himself in this new power. The specialization of all trespassers would only truly activate once they returned to reality. He had to complete his awakening before anyone else to ensure he secured the most generous rewards possible. But just at that moment, the system announced the end of the first trial, cutting everything short. In an instant, the souls of every participant were pulled back into their physical bodies. It felt like waking from a long nightmare, though the piles of corpses nearby proved it was all too real. Of the 1.8 billion people who entered the trial, only 900 million managed to survive. Within minutes, news of the catastrophe flooded every media outlet across the globe. Governments in every country collapsed into a state of absolute panic. Social media was filled with screams and desperate prayers, but he had no time to pay attention to any of that. He gently clenched his fist, and an indescribable wave of power surged from deep within him. Every attribute, skill, and talent he had earned during the trial had been fully inherited by his real body. An ordinary mortal would be thrilled by this, but he knew better than to celebrate. As trespassers grow stronger, they will become superior to normal humans, and even the most advanced weapons won't stop them. Law, order, and morality, everything will eventually crumble in the face of such absolute power. And so, his goal was clear. He had to become the one who dominated all powers. He wasn't sure if he would remain in the world of trespassers until he killed the gods and ended this cursed cycle. But this time, he had something far more important to attend to first. He rushed home and, upon opening the door, found his sister Lin Xiaoxi still curled up asleep on the sofa. Her brow was slightly furrowed, as if she were trapped in the middle of a nightmare. He gently called for her to wake up, and Lin Xiaoxi opened her eyes in a daze. Seeing him, she sighed with relief and told him she'd had a horrible dream where everyone disappeared. He comforted her, telling her to stay calm, for her brother was finally here. "Come with me to a certain place," he told her, though she wondered why he wanted to go out so late. When she asked where they were going, he simply said they were looking for someone, specifically, a man named Wang Wei. We see him reflecting on the memories of his very first reincarnation. This man, who called himself an older brother to the neighborhood, had always relentlessly bullied Lin Xiaoxi. Taking advantage of his large build, he harassed her constantly, not only extorting her money but, as we learn, doing much worse in later lives. He had even gone so far as to beat his sister until she was hospitalized. In that first life, he had been far too weak to do anything about it. But this time, things were different, and they soon reached the corner where Wang Wei usually loitered. Sure enough, there he was at the mouth of the alley, surrounded by a group of thugs. Upon seeing Lin Xiaoxi, Wang Wei approached them with a smile that was as fake as it was unsettling. He mockingly asked his little sister if she had come to visit her big brothers so late at night. He demanded to know how much pocket money she had brought, without even bothering to look at her brother. In his eyes, Lin Xiaoxi's brother was nothing more than a useless coward who posed no threat. He took a step forward, his voice as calm and chilling as a pool of stagnant water. He told the man to get on his knees and apologize to her, leaving the alley in a stunned silence for 2 long seconds. Wang Wei laughed, wondering if this foolish boy had finally lost his mind. But before he could finish his taunt, he grabbed the man's wrist, and the unmistakable sound of cracking bone echoed through the air. In the absolute silence of the alleyway, the sound was particularly jarring. Wang Wei's laughter was cut short, replaced instantly by a gut-wrenching scream of pure agony. The thugs by his side finally reacted, grabbing whatever weapons they had at hand and lunging forward. He dodged an iron bar with a simple tilt of his head, moving with a grace that seemed almost practiced, and with his free hand, he struck the first attacker squarely in the chest. The man's entire body was sent flying 3 meters back, slamming hard against the cold alley wall. The second thug was a bit faster, throwing a direct punch at his face, but he evaded it easily by twisting his body. He took the opportunity to grab the man by the neck and tossed him aside like a piece of unwanted trash. Not even 5 seconds had passed, and only Wang Wei remained, sitting on the ground clutching his mangled wrist with a face full of terror. He crouched down and looked at the man with eyes that were cold, distant, and utterly unforgiving. He asked if the man hadn't seen the news, how 1.8 billion people had participated in the trial. 900 million died, he noted calmly, and he had been the very first to complete that trial. Wang Wei's pupils contracted violently as the weight of those words finally began to sink in. Of course he had seen the news. To be honest, the entire world was talking about nothing but that sudden disaster. Those who survived had gained power far beyond the norm and were now being called transcendents. And here we realize the terrifying truth. The person standing right in front of him was number one. He warned the man that from this day forward, if he ever dared to show his face again, anywhere near his sister, he would make him wish he had never been born in the first place. With that settled, he turned around and gently took Lin Xiaoxi's hand to lead her away. He could feel his sister's hand trembling slightly, a mix of shock and lingering adrenaline. She looked at him, wondering since when her brother had become so incredibly strong. He assured her she would never have to fear anyone again, though upon reaching home, he didn't stop to rest. Instead, he turned on his computer and began the next phase of his true plan. The memories of 1,000 rebirths told him that, once the trial had officially begun, the global situation would suffer a violent upheaval in 3 months, but before that happened, there was a specific stock that, for very special reasons, was about to skyrocket hundreds of times over. That stock belonged to the Shinduan Group, whose president, enro, was a transcendent himself. He had also been one of his most important teammates in his previous life, a true brother-in-arms. Enro possessed a hidden talent known as the Dark Knight. His strength was immense, and in the coming months, he would use his power as a transcendent to rapidly expand his business empire across the globe. He would take the Shinduan Group from a small, newly listed company to a trillion-dollar giant. He invested all his savings, plus the gold coins brought from the first round, entirely into Shinduan Group shares. 2.5 days later, the stock soared, and his assets rose in a straight line. But he didn't stop there. Immediately after, he continued reinvesting every bit of profit back into the Shinduan Group. And, using his experience from past lives, he began to infiltrate the company from the inside. He eventually became the mysterious major shareholder, holding 31% of the Shinduan Group's total shares. When Lin Xiaoxi saw the notification from the bank, she was left utterly speechless. She asked her brother if this number perhaps had a few too many zeros at the end. He simply told her it was enough money for her to live several lifetimes in comfort. She worriedly asked if he had done something illegal, but he only smiled and gave her a reassuring answer. Then, using those massive funds, he went out and purchased a first-class luxury villa, complete with a 360-degree high-security vault. He even arranged for 24-hour private security. Lin Xiaoxi, for her part, thought it was all a bit too luxurious. "Brother," she said, "it's just the two of us living in such a massive house." He explained that the more expensive the housing, the better the security, and he had a very good reason for that. On the first day of every month, the souls of the transcendents are pulled away to participate in the trial. During that time, their bodies remain completely motionless. It is, to be honest, their most vulnerable moment. It doesn't matter how strong he might become within the world of Shinduan. If you die in reality, everything ends. Simple as that. Lin Xiaoxi's face turned pale instantly as she realized the stakes of their new life. 2.5 days later, the second round of the trial finally began. He gently patted Lin Xiaoxi's head and told her not to worry. He assured her that the security guards would protect her the entire time his soul was away. When he opened his eyes again, we see that he had already returned to the world of Xinduan. Unlike the first round, the transmission point this time wasn't that desolate plain, but an ancient stone city. It was surrounded by a dense forest, and a unique fragrance floated in the air, the characteristic scent of Xinduan's life arts. All the transcendents were transported together into that same stone city. Many of them recognized him immediately as the top ranker from the previous round, the Black Scythe. The crowd instinctively kept their distance from him, as if he were a predator among prey. They watched him with a heavy mixture of respect and fear in their eyes. At that moment, an angel suddenly appeared out of nowhere before the gathered crowd. Everyone wondered why this wasn't the same angel they had seen the previous time. She smiled and explained that the previous guide angel had met with an unfortunate accident. And so, for this second round, she would be the one to guide the transcendents. But to his eyes, she was nothing more than another hypocritical mask, not that he was surprised. After that, the angel began to announce the rules for the upcoming trial. In this round, the transcendents were required to choose a zone representative within 3 hours. The good news, apparently, was that there would be no fighting in this particular round. The chosen representative would have the power to dominate everyone else in the zone. They would even have the authority to decide over the life and death of others. 2.5 hours later, the voting process would officially begin. Those who completed their vote would be teleported safely back to the real world. Upon hearing that no one would have to die, the crowd was instantly filled with joy. However, deep down, he knew that choosing a representative wasn't actually the most important task. The second trial contained a hidden mission, but it could only be activated by reaching level 10. Because of this, he didn't stay in the city, but headed directly into the dense forest instead. We see that the forest of this new world was completely different from anything on the blue earth. The trees here reached dozens of meters high, their massive canopies blotting out the sky and the sun. And on the trunks grew strange mosses that emitted a faint, ethereal glow. The air was humid and warm, and every so often, the deep roars of distant beasts echoed through the trees. This was a real world, not a virtual game, and certainly not an illusion. Every single leaf and every insect's chirp was a sign of real, breathing life. On the outskirts of the forest, he encountered a lone goblin. He lunged instantly and finished it off with a single, decisive blow. But the monsters on the fringes were far too scarce, so he soon ventured deeper into the heart of the woods. There, he found entire goblin dens, a place where any ordinary transporter would never have made it out alive. He, on the other hand, simply allowed an excited smile to cross his face. The eye of death shimmered with a blue glow in the darkness, clearly revealing the weak points of every goblin. Strike after strike, he tracked their shifting weak points and eliminated them one by one. Half an hour later, his level rose to 9. Without a moment's hesitation, he assigned every single attribute point to agility. The experience of 1,000 rebirths had taught him that, in the early stages, no amount of constitution can withstand a lethal blow. But if you are fast enough, you can dodge any attack, which is a much better plan, to be honest. However, just at that moment, he suddenly sensed the presence of someone lurking behind him. The eye of death caught the distinct outlines of 2 living beings. One was hiding behind a tree, while the other stood further back among the trunks. Staying low to the ground, he raised his broken knife and lunged forward. A woman stepped out from behind the tree. She was a fellow transporter. And right behind her, a man appeared. The moment he recognized the man's face, his pupils contracted sharply in shock. She was the right hand of Mon, a transporter of truly formidable power. In his previous life, she had been a core member of the Dark Knights. And as it happened, she was also one of the teammates he had been searching for. As for the other woman, she was an actress named Yunsu. Then there was Mu Qingwan. She possessed the talent to summon trees and would eventually become the 3rd strongest in the region. But according to the trajectory of his past life, he shouldn't have been crossing paths with them just yet. Mu Qingwan clasped her hands together and, with a hint of nervousness, called him senior, noting he had placed first in the opening round. They wanted to form a team with him, but he simply refused. He had no need for companions right now. More importantly, he had to accelerate his leveling pace. Just as he turned to leave, however, he noticed Mu Qingwan's legs out of the corner of his eye. They buckled involuntarily, and she nearly fell to her knees from exhaustion. Her companion stepped forward, clearly frustrated, arguing that it was impossible for someone to take first place without a good reason. He didn't stop to listen, though, and continued heading deeper into the forest. After finishing off a few more goblins, the noise he made attracted several werewolves. Before his eyes, their weak points remained perfectly clear. He smiled, calculating that these beasts would be just enough to push him to level 10. His scythe flashed through the air, and the blood of the wolves splattered across the clearing. Congratulations were in order. He had reached level 10, and the shop function had finally been unlocked. And here is where things get interesting, as the system detected that he possessed angel blood. It asked if he wished to activate the awakening of his hidden talent. He didn't hesitate for a second. Without the slightest doubt, he chose to use it. The angel blood instantly transformed into a brilliant blue flame. The energy seeped into his body, flowing directly through the palm of his hand. In an instant, an immense and bone-chilling power took hold of him. It erupted from the deepest corners of his soul, causing his shadow to twist and warp across the ground. The darkness condensed into a pitch-black scythe, marking the first phase of his hidden talent's awakening, the Reaper. He had obtained his exclusive weapon, the Soul-Sworn Scythe. With a surge of energy, the Reaper's flame was finally activated. He now held dominion over the eternal night, ready for the harvest of souls. He received the Reaper's mark, a blessing, or a curse for his enemies, that increased his damage by 120%. And so, he earned a new title, the Reaper. As an added bonus, he would now deal double damage to divine creatures, which is quite a handy trick to have. Immediately after, he opened the shop and spent 20,000 gold coins to purchase a tracking skill. He used it right away, targeting someone he deeply loathed, Ijin Min. To his surprise, the man wasn't actually that far away from him. But before he could begin the hunt, an unusual commotion echoed from deep within the forest. These weren't the sounds of monsters, but human screams, though they were mixed with a purer, more ethereal tone. It sounded like water flowing through the trees or the soft whisper of the wind. He followed the sound, and, after pushing through a cluster of giant ferns, we see what he found. The scene before him made him pause. A small group of 7 or 8 transporters stood there. They were surrounding a corner, brandishing their weapons with faces full of excitement and greed. And there, in the center of their circle, was a young woman, covered in wounds. She was there, in a corner of the city, huddled at the foot of a giant tree. She was clearly different from the humans, with pointed ears peeking through her silver hair. And her skin was so pale that it seemed almost translucent, like fine porcelain. Her long, silver hair appeared matted and stained with blood from her recent ordeal. And in her emerald green eyes, we see nothing but pure fear and desperation. She was an elf, a native of the world of Singlu. In the memories of his 1,000 rebirths, he knew the elves were one of the oldest races on the continent. They live in symbiosis with nature, possessing powerful magical talent and incredibly long lives. But as they are torn away from nature, and as the divine trials continue to strike without mercy, a massive influx of transporters has begun to flood the world of Singlu. The elven territories are constantly being invaded, leaving their race on the very brink of extinction. Standing before this girl, he uses his eye of death to scan her broken body. He can see that her life force is fading rapidly. She is running out of time. She has several deep wounds that reach all the way to the bone, which is a grim sight indeed. But what truly strikes him is the unique magic flowing deep within her. That is the unmistakable power of elven royal blood. The lead transporter turns his head and warns him that it would be better not to interfere. But upon seeing him, the man's confidence wavers and his expression shifts slightly. He clearly recognizes our protagonist, but in this world, greed often overcomes fear. This elf is worth a fortune, and a system notification confirms that killing a rare race grants a special reward. The man begins to suggest that if he wants a share, they could work something out, but he doesn't even get to finish his sentence. In an instant, he is already standing before them, and his death scythe has already pierced the leader's chest. He finds it almost amusing that they know his power and yet still have the audacity to try and claim what belongs to him. The other transporters react immediately, surrounding him in an attempt to launch a coordinated attack. But we have to wonder, how could they ever hope to be a match for someone like him? Very soon, the forest falls into a heavy silence, and he takes a moment to compose himself. He wipes the blood from his face, pulls his blood-stained blade from the fallen corpse, and turns his gaze toward the young elf. She remains there, still huddled tightly against the gnarled roots of the ancient tree. It's clear that she is paralyzed with terror after witnessing the swift slaughter he just carried out. Her lips tremble slightly, yet she never utters a single sound or a plea for mercy. We see nothing but desperation and, above all, a deep-seated fear reflected in her emerald eyes. To her, there is no difference between these transporters and the invaders who ruined her home. He kneels down, making a conscious effort to appear a little less aggressive than he did moments ago. When he asks for her name, she remains silent for a long, uncertain moment. "Nanali," she whispers, her voice hoarse and weak, as he notes that her wounds are dangerously deep. He pulls a basic recovery potion from his inventory, though it's one that still needs to be properly processed. He places it gently in front of her, and Nanali stares at the small vial for a long time. Finally, she reaches out with a trembling hand and takes the potion into her grasp. She removes the stopper and begins to pour the liquid directly over her open wounds. An emerald green liquid begins to seep into her skin, starting the slow process of healing. We see her wounds begin to heal at a visible, almost unnatural speed. "And your people?" he asks, and her body tenses up noticeably at the question. "They died," just 2 words, but they seem to drain every ounce of her remaining strength. She explains that her father fell in battle during the very last wave of the trials. Her mother died 3 days ago at the hands of the invaders, and she looks at him. She hesitates for a moment before repeating that the invaders killed her. The entire Emerald Forest tribe is gone, and she is the only one left. The elves are facing total extinction, and he searches through the memories of his past life. He realizes he never actually encountered any elven survivors during the second round of trials. This means that in the original timeline, things were much darker. Nanali would have likely been dead by this point, a grim thought, to be sure. But for some reason, as he watches her stubbornly bite her lip to keep from crying, he feels a slight, unfamiliar stir of emotion deep inside himself. After 1,000 rebirths, he has witnessed far too much death and despair. To be perfectly honest, his heart had already become as cold as iron. Yet in this moment, standing before this young elf who has lost everything, he feels, inexplicably, that she is very much like the person he used to be. He asks if she knows of any other elven settlements, but Nanali simply shakes her head. The Emerald Forest was the very last settlement of her kind. The elves no longer have any refuge left in the world of Singlu. He remains silent for a long moment, and then he slowly stands up. "Come with me," he says, and she lifts her head to look at him. We see her emerald green eyes are filled with nothing but pure confusion. "You helped me, and I thank you for that, but I will not go with a trespasser. Your kind destroyed my home," she says. "You killed my people." "I haven't come to destroy this world," he says, interrupting her mid-sentence. His voice is calm, yet it carries a weight that admits no room for doubt. "I have come to face those gods," he declares, and Nanali's pupils contract sharply. In elven legends, after all, the gods are seen as untouchable, absolute beings. They were the ones who created the world of Singlu and established the trials. No one, not an elf, a human, nor any other race, would ever dream of such a thing. To even suggest facing the gods is a statement that borders on pure madness. But deep down, Nanali knows it is these gods who treat her people like cattle. It is as if their entire existence was destined to be erased by these examinees. And yet, this trespasser speaks of defying the gods as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You're insane," she whispers. "Perhaps," he replies, meeting her gaze directly. "But tell me, do you have a better option?" To that, Nanali can only offer silence. After a long while, she stands, leaning on her wounded body and swaying, to follow in his footsteps. "My name is Nanali El Swan," she says, "the last princess of the Emerald Forest." Her voice carries a heavy trace of desperation, and who could blame her, really? "It's not that I'm going with you," she clarifies. "It's just that I have nowhere else to go for now." He doesn't even turn around. As he moves through the forest, he doesn't slow his leveling pace for a second. To be honest, her recovery speed was much faster than he had originally anticipated. The blood of the royal elven lineage granted her a self-healing capacity far superior to that of any normal person. Barely half an hour later, and this is quite impressive, she was already able to walk on her own. What surprised him most, however, was that her combat ability was much greater than she let on. When a group of goblins leaped from the bushes, Nanali instinctively raised her hand, and emerald vines sprouted to trap them. It was the power of nature, the innate magic of the elves, though she was still clearly hindered by her wounds. She rested her chin in her hand, her face still as pale as a sheet of paper. He said nothing more. He simply turned around and completely wiped out the rest of the goblins. But just as he finished them off, his tracking skill emitted a sharp, sudden warning. Someone was nearby, and his eyes turned cold in an instant. "Wait here, don't move," he commanded, leaving Nanali to wonder where exactly he was going. He was going to settle some very old, very unfinished business. Ijin Min, that was a name etched into his memories across 1,000 reincarnations. In his previous life, that name was synonymous with pain, having betrayed him more than once. She had also hurt those around him, so he gave her no chance to ask any further questions. Betrayal, snitching, and adding fuel to the fire, the words used to describe her were many. In fact, those words were far too kind. In his 7th life, she sold his location for a piece of gear. That single act of greed led to him being cornered and killed, and he hasn't forgotten. In his 123rd reincarnation, she was the one who delivered the finishing blow while he lay gravely wounded. She slit his throat with her own hands, and in his 409th life, she even went as far as killing Lin Xiaoqi herself. To this day, Xiaoqi's heart-wrenching scream still echoes in the darkest corners of his nightmares. 1,000 cycles had passed, and she had never been the exception, not even once. It didn't matter how the timeline shifted or how many chances he tried to give her. Deep down, he knew this person was nothing more than a beast wearing human skin. And so, from his 500th reincarnation onward, he simply stopped hesitating. In every single life, whenever he crosses paths with Ijin Min, he kills her without a shred of mercy. We move deeper into the forest, where a desperate pursuit was currently unfolding. Mu Qingwan's left leg had been sliced open by a sharp blade, deep enough to expose the bone. Blood soaked through half of her trousers, painting a grim picture of her condition. She leaned against a massive tree, her face pale and her lips turning slightly blue from the blood loss. Her companion stood protectively in front of her, clutching a broken sword with a jagged, cracked edge. Despite the odds, her gaze didn't waver as Ijin Min stood before them with 6 of her subordinates. Ijin Min offered to spare their lives, mockingly calling her sweetie and noting that she had a good look about her. She promised that if she joined them, she would be guaranteed plenty to eat and drink. The companion's only response was a single, icy command to shut up. Lee Jin-min tilted her head, a cruel glint flashing in her eyes as she remarked on how tough the girl was acting. She decided it was time to break that stubborn spirit, or as she put it, to break the hard bone. She ordered her men forward to see just how long that toughness would last, which, as we know, is never a good sign. The 6 subordinates moved all at once, closing in on their target. Her companion was far from weak, blocking the first 2 attacks with that broken blade, but the third man's spear pierced her shoulder while a fourth struck her back. She fell to her knees, teeth clenched tight, refusing to let herself collapse completely. Lee Jin-min approached slowly, looking down at her with a cold, detached gaze. Still not giving up, it seems. She raised her foot and pressed it firmly onto the girl's head. She ground her heel into the companion's wound, twisting it slowly. The girl let out a low, muffled groan. The veins on her forehead bulged from the agony, yet she didn't make another sound. How interesting. Lee Jin-min withdrew her foot and turned her attention back to Mu Ching-won, clearly failing to understand the situation. She didn't finish her sentence. A pitch-black scythe had silently come to rest against her throat. The edge of the blade was less than a millimeter away from her carotid artery. Lee Jin-min's entire body went stiff. She hadn't even sensed anyone approaching. There had been no footsteps, no rustle of leaves, not even the faint trace of a breath. It was as if death itself had simply materialized out of the void. Don't move. His voice drifted from directly behind her. His tone was flat, as if he were merely commenting on the pleasant weather. But the dark blue runes flowing across the scythe gave off an aura that chilled her to the very marrow of her bones. This wasn't just simple bloodlust. It was the unmistakable scent of death itself. Lee Jin-min's 6 subordinates froze in their tracks, completely paralyzed. The arrogance on their faces was instantly replaced by a look of pure terror. They had seen that scythe before, back during the first trial, which, to be honest, meant they knew exactly what was coming. They had all heard the legends of that weapon, and we can hear the voice of one subordinate beginning to tremble. Lee Jin-min's throat tightened as she swallowed hard. Cold sweat rolled down her temple, sizzling against the scythe as if the blade itself were corrosive. "Brother," she whispered, her throat tightening once again in a desperate attempt to stay calm. The sweat continued to drip onto the metal, emitting that strange hissing sound as it touched the dark surface. "Brother," she repeated, forcing a smile as her voice suddenly took on a soft, seductive tone. "Let's speak calmly. To be honest, there is no real grudge between us." And yet, the debt he felt she owed was so great that she could never hope to repay it in this lifetime. Lee Jin-min's pupils contracted sharply as she felt the weight of those unspoken words. "What do you mean? Have we met somewhere before?" "You only need to know one thing," he said, finally withdrawing the scythe and taking a single step back. Lee Jin-min believed for a moment that she had been spared. By pure instinct, she lunged forward to put some distance between them. But she had barely moved half a step before she froze, her eyes darting downward in sudden realization. She saw that her right hand was gone. As she looked down, she realized her hand had simply vanished into thin air. The cut was as smooth as a mirror. It was so clean, in fact, that the blood hadn't even had time to start flowing. "Today you die," he stated calmly, just as the blood finally began to gush from the wound. Lee Jin-min recoiled with a piercing scream, clutching at the air with the fingers of her remaining left hand. Her 6 subordinates finally snapped out of their trance, realizing they had to act. They raised their weapons instinctively, but to his eyes, their movements were as slow as a frozen frame. The eye of death flared to life, and the weak points of all 6 men became clearly visible: hearts, spines, and temples. Every single fatal flaw was marked with a ghostly blue light, showing us exactly where the end would begin. He moved. The first subordinate saw the shadow of a blade flash before his eyes and felt a sudden, icy chill against his neck. When he looked down, he saw it. Blood was already gushing from a deep cut in his throat. He didn't even have time to try and cover the wound before his legs gave out entirely. The second subordinate swung his sword, and the blade was a mere 3 inches from our protagonist's face. That was the exact moment his arm went flying through the air. To be honest, he never stood a chance. Immediately after, the scythe swept horizontally, severing the man's body clean through the waist. The third and fourth subordinates launched a simultaneous attack from both sides. He didn't even bother to dodge. The upper and lower halves of their bodies simply fell in opposite directions, and then we see another subordinate. A formidable, burly man felt his legs turn to jelly as his weapon slipped from his trembling hands. He hit the ground with a dull thud. Above him, the scythe of death began its final descent. The scythe of death fell from top to bottom, ending the struggle in an instant. No more than 4 seconds had passed. 6 corpses now lay on the forest floor. The heavy aura of death began to lift, but the metallic scent of blood continued to drift through the trees. Lee Jin-min collapsed to the ground, her entire body shaking like a leaf in the wind. Each of those 6 subordinates had successfully passed the first round of trials as transpassers. Every single one of them possessed superhuman power that would intimidate any normal person. But before this man, they were as fragile as wet paper. It was almost absurd, really. Lee Jin-min finally came to a terrifying realization. The man standing before her simply did not belong to the same world as her own. "You can't kill me," she screamed, her voice cracking with a desperate, gut-wrenching terror. The arrogance and ferocity that had defined her face just moments ago had now vanished completely. They were replaced by nothing but naked fear and the raw, primal instinct for survival. Reducing the population only reduces the available spots to complete the mission, she argued. Killing her wouldn't benefit him at all, yet he simply continued to walk toward her with agonizing slowness. With every step he took, Min scrambled backward, dragging herself across the dirt 1 inch at a time. Suddenly, her back hit the rough bark of a massive tree. There was nowhere left to go. Trapped and without escape, her voice shifted into a frantic plea. "I'm begging you." She let out a high-pitched screech, sounding very much like a mouse whose neck was being squeezed. "I can do things for you. I have information. I know the secrets of so many people. You can? You can do what?" He stopped right in front of her, looking down with cold indifference. Through the eye of death, Min's life force appeared to him like a flickering, unstable flame. It looked weak and pathetic, a tiny light on the verge of being extinguished at any moment. In the 7th life, she had betrayed his hiding place. In the 123rd, she had cut his throat. And in the 409th, well, he knelt down, resting the tip of his scythe against her chin. He leaned in close, the cold metal of the blade pressing firmly against her trembling skin. In that life, she had stood before him and hurt his sister, strike after agonizing strike. Min's pupils contracted violently. She couldn't understand a single word he was saying. The icy, extreme gaze in his eyes seemed to reach out and make her very soul tremble with dread. "I don't know what you're talking about," she sobbed, her face a mess of tears and desperation. "I really don't know," she cried. "We've never even met before. I beg you, please let me go. I'll never do it again." He knew she was right. She didn't know, because those things hadn't actually happened yet. He stood up slowly and raised the scythe high above his head. Min's scream was cut short in an instant as a surge of dark spiritual energy erupted. The darkness rose from the corpse and was silently absorbed into the scythe of death. He looked down with an expressionless gaze at the bodies scattered across the ground. Nearby, Su Zhuan and Mu Qingwan stood frozen, having witnessed the entire ordeal from start to finish. Mu Qingwan's face was deathly pale as she covered her mouth, fighting back a wave of nausea. That overwhelming way of killing, devoid of even a flicker of emotion, was like crushing a few ants. Su Zhuan swallowed hard. The two of them bowed their heads in a gesture of alliance and gratitude. But it was only for a fleeting moment, as they made sure to maintain a safe distance from him. Su Zhuan thanked him for saving his life, though his voice sounded strained and a bit hoarse. And so, we see him return to his previous position, where she was still waiting. Leaning against a tree, her emerald green eyes shimmered slightly the moment she saw him. But then her gaze drifted downward. To be precise, it settled on his clothes. She looked at his arms, and even at the dark, jagged bloodstains splattered across his face. "You're covered in blood," she noted quietly, to which he replied that it wasn't his. "I know it's not yours," she said, pausing for a brief, heavy second. Her emerald pupils remained fixed on him, observing him with a strange, unsettling calm. "You killed 7 of them," she noted, followed by a silence that stretched for several seconds. "They deserve to die," he replied simply. She then reached down and picked up a wide leaf. It was a leaf from the bedding beside her, which she carefully dipped into the water of the stream. After that, she approached him and quietly told him to lower his head. When he asked what she was doing, she merely pointed out that he had blood on his face. He leaned down as requested, and standing on her tiptoes, she used the damp leaf to gently wipe the blood from his cheek. She didn't ask why he had killed them, nor did she care to know who they were. There was no fear in her eyes, no hint of rejection, as if this were all perfectly normal. In her mind, he had simply gone out, done what needed to be done, and returned to her side. He happened to have blood on his face, and to her, that just meant it needed to be cleaned. "Ready?" she asked, stepping back to inspect the result of her handiwork. She admitted there was still a little left, but decided it didn't really matter for now. It couldn't be cleaned any further with a leaf, so she told him to wait until they returned to wash with proper water. He thanked her, but she just brushed it off, turning her head away as the tips of her ears turned slightly red. "Let's go," she said, asking if he didn't need to level up, while he watched her walk ahead of him. He remained silent for a brief moment, and then, we see him follow after her. Over the time that followed, he helped Nayli level up with relative ease. During this process, he gradually began to understand the current state of the world of Silu. It turns out the fall of the elves wasn't caused solely by the invasion of the transpassers. Long before that, the angels had already begun systematically weakening the native races, preparing the ground for the invasion to come. Long before that, the angels had already begun to systematically weaken the power of the native races. The sacred tree of the elves was contaminated, poisoning the very heart of their civilization. The mining veins of the dwarves were blocked, and the territory of the beasts was reduced by force. It was all a game of the gods, he explained as they walked, noting that her elven race has a legend. Upon hearing him mention the prophecy of the final war, Nayli suddenly came to a halt. She asked how he could possibly know that, to which he simply replied that he knows many things. In the ancient elven legend, when the light of all races is devoured by the abyss, a soul from the cage will break the firmament, bringing the final war. And the result of that war, as we are told, will decide the fate of 2 entire worlds. A soul coming from the cage. Nayli repeated these words in a low, thoughtful voice. Her emerald green eyes looked at him as she recalled his claim that he came to face the gods. She wondered if he was the one from the prophecy, but he told her not to rush to conclusions. He interrupted her, stating that in 1,000 rebirths, he is certain he is not that prophesied person. Soon the time for the vote arrived, and all transpassers were summoned to the starting point to choose a zone representative, a burly man named Zhao Taishan with a mafia background. During the first trial, he had relied entirely on violent methods to get his way. He had killed many people, and now he was intimidating everyone else into voting for him. When he saw our protagonist return, he approached with a clearly threatening attitude. He demanded submission in exchange for life, but in response, the Soul Reaper scythe was drawn. Upon seeing this weapon radiating an aura of death, Zhao Taishan broke into a cold sweat of pure fear. It seems he finally realized, perhaps a bit too late, that he had messed with the wrong person. Zhao Taishan grit his teeth in frustration, but to be honest, he didn't dare take another step forward. The reason he hadn't acted yet was simple. He needed her to become the zone representative. During the third trial, she would be able to use her authority as a representative to their advantage. It all came down to that necessity. She had to be the one in charge. In the upcoming third trial, that authority would allow her to accomplish many things that would otherwise be impossible. Finally, the moment arrived, and the results of the voting were officially announced. Zhao Taishan was elected, and the angel, just as our protagonist expected, publicly explained the limits of his new power. He was granted force control, but with only 10 uses, and it was strictly forbidden against any transpasser with a talent. And as we know, the one who had truly awakened a talent was her, Black Monkey. Every gaze turned toward him, though they had no idea this meant he was the only one immune to the representative's control. Just before all the souls were teleported back to the Blue Star, he turned his head to look back one last time. He looked toward the spot where Nayli stood, knowing full well that she was not a transpasser. She wouldn't be teleported with the others. She would remain behind in the world of the new route. He promised to return in the next round, and though she pretended not to hear, he noticed her ears turning a soft shade of red. There was no time for rest once he returned to the real world, as time was of the essence. His first priority was to track down another key figure for his journey. Yaminzu was the companion he sought, a woman capable of providing a 50% attribute boost and powerful protective runes. She had the remarkable ability to grant shields to 5 different targets at once. In the heat of team combat, such a skill was, quite frankly, invaluable. According to the memories of his previous life, Yaminzu should be working in a dessert shop at this very moment. It didn't take long to find her, a girl with a ponytail, busy behind the counter packing cakes for customers. As we see him enter the shop, she looked up from her work and was momentarily stunned. "You're my classmate, aren't you?" she asked, her voice filled with surprise. Linyu, however, pretended as though he had never laid eyes on her before. He simply tilted his head, asking if she was indeed his classmate. It was vital that he acted this way. Maintaining the illusion of a first meeting was part of the plan. His memories from his previous life warned him that acting too familiar right away would be a mistake. She would likely become guarded, whereas a casual, accidental reunion would make it much easier for her to trust him. "I'm sorry," he said smoothly. "I don't quite remember." Yaminzu's expression fell for a brief second, though she quickly forced a smile back onto her face. She told herself it didn't matter, remarking that she wasn't exactly the most memorable person anyway. When she asked what he'd like, he ordered a tiramisu and, making it look unintentional, handed over an extra amount of cash. He told her to keep the change, which prompted her to protest that it was far too much. He insisted she consider it a small bonus for her hard work, leaving poor Yaminzu completely perplexed. After a few more of these casual encounters, they soon added each other as friends. She was a simple-minded girl, the kind of person who found it very easy to place her trust in others. That was, to be perfectly honest, both her greatest virtue and her most dangerous weakness. Later, during a dinner together, she willingly revealed the nature of her hidden ability to him. It was a massive boost, a 50% increase to every single attribute. He told her it was incredible as he looked over the attribute panel, and for once, he wasn't acting. His admiration was entirely sincere, yet she just blushed and insisted it really wasn't such a big deal. She insisted it was useless for fighting, having no idea just how terrifyingly powerful that ability truly was. During his own first trial, he had only managed to obtain a set of random projectiles. Even though the rewards were randomized, his luck back then had only affected his gold coin production. Yaminzu's buff, however, would undoubtedly maximize his gains when combined with his own lethal efficiency. When he opened that random capsule, we see him obtain a staggering 9,999 gold coins. The absolute maximum, something he hadn't encountered once in 1,000 past lives. Yaminzu then handed him a glowing purple crystal, a rare magical gem. She explained that she had simply stumbled upon it by chance during her trial. It looked beautiful to her, though she admitted she had no idea what kind of crystal it actually was. She repeated that it was just a lucky find from her time in the trial. To her, it was just a pretty trinket, as she had no clue regarding its actual purpose. As he looked at the crystal, his heart began to race with a sudden, fierce excitement. A purple magic crystal, the rarest of all possible colors. Upon reaching level 20 and unlocking the socketing function, it could boost every single attribute at once. The value of such an item in the later stages of the game is, quite frankly, incalculable. He thanked her sincerely, telling her that this gift was incredibly important to him. Yuminzu simply smiled, telling him that he had already helped her so much in return. To her, a stone was just a stone, but she had no way of knowing it was worth an absolute fortune. And so, the time soon arrived for the third round of trials to begin. The moment his soul was pulled into the trial, he could feel that things were very different this time. The destination of the transmission was no longer the site of the previous round, but a fortress surrounded by high walls. In the very center of the fortress, a massive crystal stood tall. This was to be the sacred dance of this particular journey. We see that the zones were still divided, and the travelers from his area were teleported directly inside the fortress. 4,900 people remained who had not yet been eliminated. Only 1,225 would successfully advance, meaning 3/4 of them were about to be cut. The rule is simple. Every 30 minutes, monsters will launch an assault against the sacred dance. The mission for our travelers is to protect that sacred dance at all costs. In the end, everyone will be ranked based on their total number of kills. The first 1,250 will survive. Anyone ranked below that position will, quite simply, die. Zhao Taishan understood it at a glance. This was a race to see who could kill the most monsters. He held the right of forced command, which should have made this round easy, but the angel's next words chilled him to the bone. The zone representative can use the right of forced command during this round. However, if the representative is killed by a traveler, the killer immediately inherits the title and the 10 command orders are renewed. Suddenly, 4,000 cold and sinister gazes turned in unison toward Zhao Taishan. He walked up to his side and told him not to be afraid. He explained he hadn't come to kill him and could guarantee his survival, provided he obeyed every single instruction. Zhao Taishan's pride, however, led him to flatly refuse the offer. He had already foreseen this outcome, so he simply noted that from now on, the man's life or death was no longer his concern. While the others were competing to be zone representatives, he had already left the fortress and was heading straight for the forest, knowing he was still there. And indeed, right by the ruins of the Emerald Forest, he found him. The figure was sitting all alone, with a bouquet of withered flowers resting by his side. This, as it turns out, was the traditional way the elves commemorated their fallen kings. "You've returned," he said in a quiet voice, though we can see the faint traces of tears still in his eyes. He reminded him that he promised to return, urging him to come along since the current trial zone wasn't far away. He explained that he needed to increase his level by hunting the monsters found there. Besides, staying here would be far too dangerous once the next wave of transmigrants arrived. The elf stood up, brushed the dust from his clothes, and insisted that he wasn't following out of fear. He claimed he simply had no better place to go for the time being. Our protagonist simply nodded and watched as the elf huffed and marched forward, though in entirely the wrong direction. "It's that way," he noted, pointing toward the opposite horizon. The elf's ears turned red instantly, a small sign of his growing embarrassment. He had taken the wrong path, so he pointed again toward the correct destination. This time, the elf's ears flushed a deep, unmistakable crimson. In silence, he turned around, and after leading him back to the trial zone, he began to level up with a frantic intensity. In this third round, the sheer number of monsters was enormous, and with the triple experience bonus, his efficiency was incredible. Every single time the Scythe of Death claimed the life of a monster, his soul harvest talent automatically absorbed a portion of the spiritual energy, permanently strengthening his attributes. The elf could only stand to the side, watching the display in utter astonishment. His soul harvest talent automatically absorbed a portion of the spiritual energy, permanently strengthening his attributes. The elf stood to the side, watching the display in utter astonishment. "What kind of monster are you?" he asked, to which our protagonist simply replied, "Death." "Are you joking?" the elf pressed, but the answer was a firm no, leaving them both in silence for a moment. In the ancient elven legends, you see, death is a concept that doesn't truly exist. They believe souls simply return to the tree of nature, but now, death itself was standing right in front of him. The elf turned his face away, murmuring something under his breath in a low voice. Whatever he said in Elvish remained a mystery, but by the time the third wave ended, our hero had already reached level 20. At this point, the system unlocked a new function, the combination slot. Without wasting a second, he placed the purple magic crystal he had been given into the Scythe of Death. Faint lines of purple light began to glow, and all of his attributes saw a significant increase. At the same time, reaching level 20 also unlocked the second stage of his death talent. This was the full expansion of the realm of Eternal Night. A new skill was unlocked, Night of Death, which transforms his entire attack range into eternal darkness. During the night, his attack power doubles, and his attack speed increases by 50%. Furthermore, any targets not belonging to the side of death find their vision severely limited. He also obtained the symbol of death, which increases his attack power by a full 100% during the day. And when night falls, his attack speed receives another 50% boost. He activated Night of Death, and in an instant, with him at the very center, Every trace of light within his attack range was utterly devoured by the shadows. The sky turned completely black, as if the sun itself had been extinguished. Only his eyes remained visible, glowing with a cold, piercing blue light. The fourth wave of goblins had just arrived, only to be instantly devoured by the encroaching darkness. Within the realm of eternal night, they stumbled about like headless flies, utterly lost. Meanwhile, our hero moved through the shadows like death itself, his scythe reaping lives with terrifying precision. In the depths of that night, the only sounds to be heard were the desperate wails of the goblins. Wherever death passed, every single strike found its mark with surgical accuracy. There was only the night, the cries of the monsters, and the whistle of the scythe cutting through the air. The elf stood at the very edge of the darkness, his green eyes fixed on the figure reaping everything in sight. His heart began to beat a little faster, not out of fear, but because within that suffocating gloom, that man's silhouette radiated a strength that, inexplicably, acted as a calming beacon in the night. After massacring the fourth wave, he gathered 20,000 gold coins and finally purchased the recognition skill. Meanwhile, we see that Zhao Tieson's situation had spiraled completely out of control. The fourth wave had transformed into fierce werewolves, outnumbering the survivors 10-1. Zhao Tisen had exhausted his 14 forced commands, using the last ones to turn others into human shields. He could only beg for help, but our protagonist simply watched him with a gaze of pure ice. He had used up all his control, and in this world, that meant he no longer had any value. As the saying goes, an adult must pay the price for their own decisions. Zhao Tieson's face turned as gray as ash, realizing his time had finally run out. At that moment, his subordinate Ma Kuan lunged forward while he was distracted and drove a sword through his chest. "I'm sorry," he muttered, "but I just want to survive." The system's voice rang out, announcing that Ma Kuan had killed the zone representative, Zhao Tisen. Inheriting the title of representative, Ma Kuan looked back at the survivors, now as fierce as wolves, and knelt before our hero to swear his loyalty. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, though what happened next sent a cold shiver straight through Ma Kuan's heart. Our protagonist ordered him to use his 10 friends to destroy the sacred object. Ma Kuan was utterly stunned, remembering the angel's warning about what would happen if that object were destroyed. He stood there, paralyzed, as the angel's words echoed in his mind. To be honest, destroying a sacred object usually carries a rather severe punishment. "Do you prefer punishment or death?" our hero asked, and Ma Kuan fell into a heavy silence. With a deafening screech that tore through the air, the sacred object was finally shattered. A system notification appeared immediately, "Sacred object destroyed." The mission had failed, and the divine emissary of the kingdom was set to descend in 30 minutes. While the other transmigrants fell into a total panic, our hero allowed a smile to touch his lips, one we hadn't seen in a long time. The real game was only just beginning, and soon, the divine emissary descended, bathed in a slowly falling golden glow. He had a benevolent face and a soft, gentle smile. Some were naive enough to believe that an angel would be incapable of killing, a fatal mistake, as it turned out. Then, without warning, thousands of blades of light began to rain down from the heavens. 300 transmigrants vanished instantly in that first brutal massacre. Taking advantage of the absolute chaos, our hero moved through the shadows to circle behind the emissary. Through the eye of death, he could now see the creature's weak point with perfect clarity. The eyes. As it turns out, the divine emissary has no sense of hearing at all. Sight is his only sense, so our hero leaped and released the mark of the god of death, increasing his damage by 120%. This was combined with the double damage granted by his god observer title. The lash of the lost soul struck his eyes deeply, reducing his health by 40% with a single, brutal blow. The emissary shrieked in agony and released a barrier, desperately trying to trap his attacker. But our protagonist already knew every single one of his movements. At the very last second, before the barrier could fuse, he managed to slip out of reach, circled behind him again, and slashed his other eye. Now completely blind, the emissary began to release blades of light in a frantic, desperate frenzy. He performed an indiscriminate sweep, but our hero countered with the death domain. In an instant, the darkness devoured all light within the domain of eternal night. The power of those blades of light was drastically reduced, becoming almost harmless. Moving through the shadows with a single, fluid strike, our hero didn't stop there. He severed the left wing, and with another swift motion, he took the right one as well. The emissary entered a state of imminent death, his divine power fading fast. In a final act of desperation, he triggered his passive ability, Last Radiance. As he hovered on the brink of death, the emissary unleashed that final passive skill. Last Radiance made him completely immune to all damage for 60 seconds, a long time to wait, to be honest. Our hero simply kept a safe distance, waiting in total silence for the clock to run out. After those 60 seconds passed, the golden glow finally dissipated, leaving the creature vulnerable. The lash of the soul traced a perfect arc through the air, ready to end it all. He severed the head with a final strike. "Congratulations, we see that he has defeated the divine emissary of the kingdom." our hero rose 3 levels, receiving a reward of 8,000 forbidden coins for his efforts. And as if that weren't enough, he was granted an extra bonus of 4,000 more forbidden coins. He also obtained the Rebel of the Gods title, which reduces damage from divine creatures by 80%. In addition, he gathered divine emissary dust and radiant vestment dust from the remains. His level reached 30, and the effect of the radiant vestment immediately boosted his intelligence by 30 points. His skill damage increased by 30% as well, a significant power spike, to be sure. This, as it turns out, was his true purpose for destroying the sacred object in the first place. He intended to kill the kingdom's divine emissary and claim these rewards that are impossible to get through normal means. The angel descended once more, and the time came to publish the official rankings. In first place for the entire region was Blackblade. The count was staggering, 3,631 monsters slain. Every single transmigrator present fell into a heavy, stunned silence. Someone whispered in disbelief that he truly was at level 30. And then, the moment of reckoning arrived as the angel announced the list of those to be eliminated. Thousands of transmigrators who failed to meet the standard were reduced to ashes amidst the flames. Mukingwan trembled with fear, and his companion squeezed his hand tightly to steady him. Meanwhile, we see Nanali standing under the shade of a tree in the distance. She watched everything in silence, the flames covering the sky reflected in her emerald green eyes. Her expression was complex. After all, this is the brutal reality of the world of transmigrators. Cruel, cold, and ruled by the law of the strongest. Yet, the man who called himself the god of death spoke these words before thousands. Are you really going to just stand there and watch while they slaughter your own kind? Nanali's heart skipped a beat. Suddenly, she felt that perhaps the prophecy of the elven legend wasn't just a story after all. Upon returning to the real world, our hero immediately began the next phase of his plan. First, he had to eliminate a specific threat, Zon Xian Yuan. This person had managed to obtain the flash rune during the trial. It was precisely that rune that led her down a dark path of madness and perversion. In his previous life, she used the rune's blinding effect to commit all sorts of atrocities in the real world. She committed countless crimes, but the most terrifying part is that she later discovered the mind rune. This was a rune capable of reading the very thoughts of others. With such power at her disposal, almost no one could hope to defeat her. In that past life, she kidnapped In Xiaoxi to force him to hand over vital information. He lost an eye in that battle, which is why, in every rebirth, he rushes to find her first and seize the mind rune. This time was no exception. He put on a mask and made his way to that specific abandoned warehouse. The pale moonlight filtered through the broken windows, illuminating the decay. As mottled shadows stretched across the floor, Zon Xian Yuan arrived exactly as expected. She was there searching for the hidden mind rune, unaware she wasn't alone. It seems the gods also hide certain special objects within the real world. Very few know their locations, and when she saw a masked man at the entrance, her expression shifted instantly. She demanded to know who he was. He simply replied that he was there for her life. Zon Xian Yuan released the flash rune, and a blinding white light erupted from within her. But in the very next instant, we see the arrival of the Night of Death. The darkness devoured all light in an immediate, crushing wave. In the domain of eternal night, clarity simply does not exist. The shadows swallowed every trace of light instantly. In the domain of eternal night, there is no light, only a void where nothing can be seen. The battle ended quickly, and he took the newly activated mind rune from her body. The mind rune, as we know, allows one to read the innermost thoughts of any target. With this in his possession, his upcoming encounter with Een Moon would be foolproof. The 5-star hotel on Saturday was, in reality, one of Een Moon's many hidden businesses. The memories of 1,000 rebirths gave him total control, yet today he had to play the part of an inexperienced youth. Su Zhihan arrived first, and upon seeing our hero, he was clearly taken aback. He couldn't fathom how a university student under 20 could be the majority shareholder who invested 280 billion. The mind rune, of course, captured every single one of his doubts. Een Moon arrived late, wearing a silver suit and black cufflinks that radiated an air of absolute power. He carried the typical nobility and cold distance one expects from the son of a wealthy family. He had arrived late on purpose, a classic move to assert his authority over the room. Our hero feigned submissiveness while shaking his hand, playing along as Een Moon ordered a table of exotic delicacies. It was a carefully choreographed performance of a young man seeing the world for the first time. He claimed his achievements were merely due to family help, mentioning he had only just turned 20. I'm not that young, he insisted, claiming that he had earned all of this money entirely on his own. At only 20 years old, even if he had started at birth, earning billions through skill alone seemed impossible. He maintained his naive act, telling them with a shrug that he really wasn't that incredible. He explained that he had simply taken his initial capital and multiplied it dozens of times through a single investment. And then, we see him reveal his secret, that all of this was possible because he had obtained a special talent. Omnipotent precognition, they thought. It sounded like a joke, to be perfectly honest. Sujahan clearly didn't believe a word of it, so to dissipate those doubts, our hero took a different approach. He began to reveal several unknown secrets regarding Moon's private life. He spoke of Moon being the firstborn son of the five-star group. He mentioned how he wasn't valued by his family and had secretly founded the Singdun group. He even noted that this very hotel was a hidden business, prompting a furious Sujahan to demand his sources. While Moon fell into deep reflection, our hero finally decided to play his ultimate ace. "What if I were to give you information about the fourth trial?" he proposed calmly. He asked if they still thought he was lying, and in that moment, both men instantly lost their composure. He informed them that the fourth trial would no longer be about killing monsters, but a battle between transcendence. In just 2 minutes, the man who had been so haughty and arrogant was completely transformed. Sujahan became extremely serious, realizing that if he truly possessed precognition, everything changed. He set down his glass and looked at our hero with burning, intense eyes. He declared that he was willing to cooperate fully with whatever plan our hero had in mind. Because for Moon, obtaining information before each trial would be an absolutely invaluable treasure. But in reality, he wasn't a prophet at all. He was a regressor. A regressor who had been reborn 1,000 times, to be precise. Simply put, the identity of a prophet was a much safer mask to wear. If he exposed his true nature, high-ranking angels and even the deities themselves might take notice of him. But omnipotent precognition was a talent they could understand, a manageable mystery, if you will. It wouldn't raise too many suspicions. As he left the hotel, he let out a long, heavy sigh. The first piece had finally been placed on the board. Next, he knew he had to inform Yuminzu about the upcoming fourth trial. But when we see them meet, Yuminzu was left absolutely stunned by the sight of his new sports car. She asked if it was really his, and he simply told her to get in and find out. Minzu asked with the curiosity of a child how much he had actually spent on such a car. He answered with total indifference that it had only cost him 9 million. But that casual response was enough to give poor Minzu quite a shock. 9 million. She wondered just how many small supermarkets one could open with that kind of money. Deep down, she felt she would probably never earn 9 million in her entire life. Hearing her sound so discouraged, he tried his best to comfort her. He told her not to look down on herself, reminding her that just days ago, he had nothing either. In that moment, however, Minzu wasn't really listening to a word he said. She was completely submerged in her own little world of fantasy. He had a fortune of billions, and yet, he still wanted to go for a drive with her. She wondered if he liked her, as it certainly felt like they were on a date. Minzu's cheeks flushed without her even realizing it, lost as she was in her own thoughts. He continued, telling her that he had something important to confess. But Minzu, naturally, interpreted this as a sudden declaration of love. Her mind was racing. A confession? It was almost too much for her to process. He cleared his throat twice to break the awkward tension that had settled between them. He called her sister to clarify, and Minzu waved her hands hurriedly, feeling equally uncomfortable. She claimed she was only joking, though internally, she had already panicked 1,000 times over. Then he explained that his wealth wasn't due to luck, but because he possessed a future-seeing service. Upon hearing this, Minzu seemed absolutely delighted by the revelation. She thought his service sounded incredible, but wondered why he was sharing something so private with her. He smiled softly, reminding her that she had shared the details of her own service with him before. He felt it was only fair to be honest with her, and Yuminzu smiled back like a happy child. To be honest, finally saying what was on his mind felt quite good. After that, she asked him why he was revealing the secret of his service text now. He knew that if he didn't tell her the truth, she would never believe what he was about to say next. And so, he revealed the crucial information regarding the upcoming fourth trial. Minzu, still thinking of their date, didn't want the mood ruined, but the impact of his words left her stunned and unable to react. He insisted repeatedly that she must be extremely careful with everything around her. Seeing him so genuinely worried about her, Minzu found herself drifting back into her own little world once again. She told herself that if he was worrying this much about her, he simply had to feel something for her, right? He decided that if she sought him out later, he would accept, but for now, he simply had to get Minzu home. He felt a bit bewildered. After being reborn 100 times, he was only just realizing that Minzu actually liked him. Still, he realized that now that they had an emotional foundation, it would be much easier to keep Minzu by his side. And so, exactly as anticipated, the fourth trial finally arrived. The moment his soul was transmitted to the world of Shinglu, he felt an atmosphere entirely different from the previous rounds. The angel descended from above and began to announce the new rules of the game. The fourth trial was to be a duel, a direct confrontation between the travelers themselves. Each traveler would be granted 3 life badges to carry through the trial. Whenever a participant was eliminated, they would lose one of those precious badges. And for those who lost all their badges, death would be permanent. No second chances this time. Yes, the stakes were absolute. Lose your badges, and your life would end right then and there. Only the top 500 participants with the most badges would be allowed to advance. The trial would officially begin the following day, meaning any eliminations before then wouldn't count toward the total. The cruelty of this round far surpassed the others, as the enemies were no longer predictable monsters, but intelligent, skilled humans. The moment the angel finished speaking, the air in the assembly grew thick with tension and sudden hostility. His first move was to distance himself from the crowd and head straight toward the emerald forest. Sure enough, he found her exactly where he expected, beneath that same withered sacred tree. But this time Nanali wasn't alone. She was surrounded by 7 or 8 small, delicate figures. They were young girls from the Qingling tribe, hiding shyly behind Nanali and watching him with those large, green eyes. "Where did you find them?" he asked, noticing that Nanali's expression had softened unusually. She explained that after he had left the last time, she discovered them deep within the forest. They were, as it turned out, the very last survivors of the Emerald Forest. They were only children, 7 little elven children, to be precise. The eldest appeared to be about 10 years old in human terms, while the youngest was only 4 or 5. They huddled close to Nanali, as if they were clinging to the only family they had left. When he asked about their parents, Nanali simply shook her head in silence. He remained quiet for a moment, knowing this trial was a duel between travelers. The forest was about to become far more dangerous than it had ever been before. He told her they couldn't stay there, which caused Nanali to frown in concern. "Then where are we supposed to go?" she asked, and he simply told them to follow him. He promised to find a safe place, which, to be honest, was becoming a bit of a habit for him. He repeated that they couldn't stay, and we see Nanali's frown deepen at the thought. When she asked for their destination again, he just insisted they follow his lead. He vowed to find a secure location, using that same familiar phrase once again. Even though she grumbled about it, she immediately began telling the elven children to gather their things. He noticed that during his absence, Nanali had built a rudimentary camp with vine fences and leaf beds. It was clear that she had put a great deal of effort into taking care of those little ones. When he asked if she'd been caring for them alone, she replied naturally that elves never abandon their own. The smallest child tugged on his sleeve, looked up, and asked in broken common tongue if he was that famous strong person. The little one insisted that's what their big sister had said, which made him turn his gaze toward Nanali. Her face flushed a deep crimson instantly, and she jerked her head away in a sudden fit of embarrassment. She stammered that she hadn't said that exactly. She had only told them a few stories about what happened last time. The children chimed in anyway, confirming that their sister said he had defeated all the bad guys. And apparently, she had also mentioned him taking down a very, very large angel. The little elf gestured with wild excitement, clearly impressed by the tales he'd been told. Nanali looked as though she wanted the earth to swallow her whole, and he couldn't help but let out a laugh. In fact, it was the first time he had laughed from the heart in all of his 1,000 rebirths. We see him lead Nanali and the elven children to a hidden cave tucked away at the very edge of the trial area. It was a clever spot, as most of the other challengers wouldn't dream of venturing that far out. Once they were safely settled in, he finally began his formal preparations for the task at hand. The central objective of this 4th round was twofold, and both parts were equally vital. First, he needed to collect enough badges to secure a position at the very top of the rankings. And second, he had to kill Matsuin to trigger the hidden mission, a grim necessity, to be sure. Matsuin, having become the regional representative, had grown increasingly arrogant with every passing day. After the 3rd round ended and they returned to the real world, he had even started picking fights with his own subordinates. As the 4th round began, his first move was an attempt to use the sacred tree's power to launch an attack. But what he didn't realize was that his own death was the secret condition required to activate the hidden quest. Eliminating a regional representative in this specific round can unlock a passage to a much deeper trial zone. There is something there that he desperately needs, and while searching for Matsuin, he crossed paths with several other challengers. Most of them, upon seeing him, chose to steer clear and voluntarily went their own way. However, a few reckless souls still tried to catch him off guard with a surprise attack. They all met the same end, losing a badge and fleeing in utter embarrassment. He didn't take their lives, mind you. He simply relieved them of their precious badges. The Eye of Death allowed him to see through everyone's weaknesses and deceptive movements. And when combined with his extreme agility, he was practically untouchable. Any ambush was useless against him, and finally, we see him find Matsuin among some ruins. At his side, Matsuin was followed by a group of 7 or 8 henchmen. They were all just passers-by who had been forcibly recruited under his control. "Hey, the big brother has arrived," Matsuin called out the moment he saw him. A bitter, twisted smile began to spread across the man's face. But in an instant, the connection of the wise soul was pressed directly against his throat. Matsuin's smile froze as he was told that his courage had finally reached its limit. "Brother, big brother, to the path, attack," he cried out in a desperate panic. By eliminating the current regional representative, the hidden mission was triggered and the abyss passage swung open. Matsuin's 3 badges and his regional authority transferred to him at once, though he had no interest in the title. According to the rules, he could choose to renounce the inheritance, knowing the representatives face severe punishments later on. It is a position that appears glorious on the surface, but in reality, it is quite lethal. The abyss passage opened right where Matsuin fell, manifesting as a swirling black vortex on the ground. It emanated a haunting atmosphere as he fell through to a dark red space, the deep trial zone where far more powerful monsters dwell. These zones are far more dangerous than the normal trials, but they also hide richer rewards. And here, he finally found the shadow symbol, which allows a user to vanish. It completely masks one's aura within the shadows, making it impossible for even the angels to detect. For him, this was the crucial key to facing high-ranking angels later on. As he emerged from the deep zone, the fourth trial was nearing its end, and upon returning to the cave, we see Nanali teaching the elven children to weave grass crowns. Moonlight spilled through the entrance, illuminating her long silver hair and making the entire scene look as peaceful as a painting, a rare moment of calm, to be sure. She ran over and pressed a crooked grass crown into his hand, telling him that if he wore it, he wouldn't have any more nightmares. He looked down at the simple gift in his hand and remained silent for a few seconds before quietly thanking her, while Nanali watched him with a faint, hidden smile. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, the two of them sat at the cave entrance, watching a night sky filled with stars that flickered with a strange blue-green light. In the distance, the Tree of Life emitted a soft glow, and Nanali suddenly broke the silence to thank him, specifically, for choosing not to kill the children. Most travelers who encounter elven children either kill them for rewards or take them as slaves, making him the very first person to actually offer them help. He reminded her that he wasn't a good person, but she simply hugged her knees and noted that while he had killed many, he hadn't killed the innocent. After a long silence, he asked about her people's future, but her voice dropped as she admitted the elven race had no future left with their sacred tree withered. With their territory occupied and their warriors dead, she saw no hope, but he insisted there was a future, leading her to wonder if his precognition had triggered again. He looked her in the eye and told her it wasn't a vision, but a promise, leaving Nanali stunned as the stars reflected in her emerald green eyes. He vowed to help the elven race once this was all over, and though she seemed overwhelmed by the weight of the challenge, she ultimately said nothing at all. She quickly turned her head to wipe her eyes, claiming that elves don't cry in front of strangers, and he, being a gentleman, didn't point out that she clearly just had. The fourth trial finally ended, and as his soul returned to his body in reality, he immediately dove into managing his various operations within the Bitcoin markets. Because his information from the trial had been so precise, others began to trust his apparent omniscience, and Inmoen even reached out to propose a total business transformation. Inmoen's voice was grave over the phone, admitting that the old technological path was failing and that a new economy based on travelers was rapidly emerging. He leaned back on the sofa, tapping his fingers rhythmically, knowing that in 6 months, governments would try to regulate these new powers with laws that could never keep up. He advised that they needed to build a commercial empire covering the entire traveler ecosystem before those regulations could even be drafted. Inmoen fell silent for a few seconds before asking just how far his precognition could see into the future. The answer was simple: far enough. After hanging up, Linsea Oxy approached with a glass of warm milk, asking if he was in a hurry, as she had been quite affected lately by her peers in the city community. Apparently, her roommate's boyfriend had already reached level 11 and changed professions, spending his days at school showing off, which, naturally, was exactly one level higher than her own boyfriend. He noted this in passing, knowing he couldn't let his true level be known. If someone with ill intentions discovered he was a level 30 traveler, Linsea Oxy would become a target. Regardless, she was thrilled, telling him he was incredible. She joked about going to school to brag the next day before running off to her room, leaving him to shake his head and return to his business affairs and investment planning. The stock price of the Sindun Group had already begun to rise as predicted. According to his memory, it would become the country's largest company in the traveler economy within 3 months. But this was merely a facade, as he was secretly busy buying up large amounts of abandoned land in nearby areas, parcels of land that wouldn't attract any unwanted attention. His past memories told him that in 6 months, dimensional rifts would appear between the blue planet and the star world, and creatures from another world would come rushing through. The places where these rifts would appear were precisely the lands he was currently purchasing, which would soon transform into prime hunting grounds. Travelers would flock there to hunt these otherworldly creatures, causing the land's value to multiply by 10,000. More importantly, controlling the hunting grounds meant controlling the resources. That is where true power lies. As the days passed between his monthly trials, his life was divided into several distinct paths. One was his strategic planning in the real world. This included his cooperation with Inmoen, the acquisition of hunting grounds, and dealing with an increasingly chaotic social order, while another path was preparing for the next round of trials. He spent his time improving his equipment, buying skills, and training, and at the end of every trial, he made sure to visit Nanali. As the rounds of trials progressed, his stays in the star world grew longer, and Nanali's attitude toward him shifted from initial distrust and distance to a relationship that was difficult to define. She no longer said he was just passing through, but instead asked when he would return. He once remarked that this place was beneath her, considering she was a princess. The former princess was crouching by the stream, washing clothes stained with leaves, her long silver hair floating gently on the water's current, and he found himself watching her for a long time. When she asked what he was looking at, he claimed it was nothing, but she called him a liar, noting that his mental runes weren't active, so he wasn't looking at her as a hero or an elf. He admitted he was simply watching her wash clothes, and when she asked what was so interesting about that, he dryly noted that she was doing a very clean job of it. She finally looked up at him, her emerald eyes fixed on his, unable to stop a smile from forming as she called him boring, a moment of warmth he hadn't felt in 1,000 rebirths. The 5th and 6th rounds were completed one after another, and by then, his level had risen above 50, allowing him to finally unlock the 3rd phase of his death talent. The soul harvest had reached its complete form. Now, every life he took would have its spiritual energy fully absorbed, and once that energy hit the threshold, he could unlock the 4th phase. At the same time, our hero's team continued to grow. Inmoen officially became his ally, her Dark Knight talent having already awakened to its 2nd phase. Combined with his Eternal Night domain, the two were nearly invincible. Soon, Mukinwan and others joined the ranks. The summoning talent of Mukinwan completed its breakthrough during the 5th trial, allowing her to summon powerful elven guardians. Meanwhile, Yamin's guardian talent became the core of the team. Her attribute buffs and shields played a decisive role in team combat. In the Star World, she was no longer just the elven princess he had rescued by chance. Over several trials, her strength grew rapidly as her royal elven blood gradually awakened. She could now control over 5,000 spirits, which, to be perfectly honest, was a staggering display of power. These forces were unleashed within the trials, far surpassing the capabilities of an average native inhabitant of that world. She showed her worth in every trial and capture, though she still felt a heavy burden regarding her fallen nation and the duty to supply resources to the remaining forces. It was quite a task to manage the logistics of the resistance, especially when it came to making sure they knew I was the one helping the elves. She reluctantly agreed to trade with him, though her pride as a former royal made the negotiation a bit delicate. The weapons and armor she forged far exceeded the quality of anything found in the system shop, a true craftsman's touch, we might say. Then there was the young warrior Liefin, a member of the Baluinlan tribe. Despite losing an arm in a transmigrator attack, she remained as fierce as a wild beast. She harbored a deep, burning hatred for transmigrators, viewing them as nothing more than invaders of her world. However, she held a special respect for Nanali, as the elves had saved the Inlan tribe a century ago. Loyalty, it seems, has a very long memory. We also meet the mysterious half-elf alchemist, Fei-Yin, a woman who preferred the shadows to the spotlight. No one knew her true name, but she was famous for selling various rare potions on the black market. Her prices were exorbitant, bordering on the criminal, but the effects of her brews were undeniably extraordinary. All of these pieces were quietly falling into place, forming a foundation for the power he would soon need. But not everything was going so smoothly. On the 7th trial planet, he received a piece of news that was, to say the least, quite unsettling. Through his intelligence network, Inmoen discovered that a mysterious organization had begun operating in secret back on the blue planet. Every single member of this organization is a high-level transmigrator. They call themselves the Chosen, preaching an ideology that transmigrators are the true people of the tribe. But that isn't the case. They believe they are the ones chosen by the gods, and that common people must submit to their rule. This idea has, unfortunately, found a massive echo among the other transmigrators. More and more of them are beginning to break away from the social order, using their power to oppress ordinary citizens. The most terrifying part, however, is that the shadows of angels seem to be lurking behind these chosen ones. If the angels are indeed supporting this organization, the implications are grim. Inmoen's voice over the phone sounds heavy and cold as she delivers the news. It means the gods don't just want to wipe out humanity through the trials. They also intend to sow division among the people themselves. It is the usual tactic of the gods, as we have come to expect. He had seen it coming. Inmoen remained silent on the other end of the line. She no longer questioned his predictions, asking only what their next move would be. His answer was simple. They had to pull them out by the roots before they grew any stronger. This was, in fact, another reason why he had purchased those lands. By controlling the resources, he could effectively strangle every transmigrator organization out there. After finishing the 8th trial, he made a decision no one expected. He would bring Nanali back to the blue planet. The 3rd phase of his death talent and the energy from the soul harvest allowed him to touch a deeper power. He was looking at the barrier between planes, something no one had ever achieved in his 1,000 past lives. He was going to bring the natives of the star world directly to the blue planet. The barrier between planes was established by the gods themselves, and theoretically, it was meant to be impassable. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the true essence of the death talent? It is control over death, and the essence of the barrier between planes is, in a way, a type of ending. It ends all connection between two worlds, and since death can control the end, well, the result is inevitable. Borrowed. Present hours. I love you. Hello, baby. Your eagerness. I am glad that you are coming there for me. Grisando battles. I have great regrets for my attitude, but your burning passion for me is also imperceptible. The blade struck nothing, but space itself tore open. A dark crack appeared in the air, revealing an illuminated city on the other side. It was the night view of the blue planet, signaling the awakening of the fourth stage of his death talent, inevitable tear. A high-ranking angel detected the action, but he didn't care. He simply extended his hand as Nanali looked at the elven children behind her. She placed her hand in his palm, noting she wasn't going with him out of fear. She didn't finish the sentence, but her grip tightened. Nanali's reaction upon arriving at the blue planet was quite different from what we might have imagined. Instead of being amazed by skyscrapers or cars, she looked at the sky with a complex expression, noting the lack of blue or the tree of life. He knew the blue planet lacked the tree, and she lowered her head, feeling as though the very air around them was empty. The natural elements here were far less dense than in the star world. It felt like an arid desert, but he assured her she would adjust. When Linsea Oxy saw him arrive home with a silver-haired girl with pointed ears, her jaw practically hit the floor. He introduced Nanali as an elf from the star world who would be living with them, prompting Linsea to circle her in curiosity. Linsea reached out to touch the tip of her ear, causing Nanali to blush and pull back, as one should never touch an elf's ears. Despite the awkward start, the relationship between Linsea Oxy and Nanali turned out to be unexpectedly good. She was naturally a sociable person. In fact, considering the long lifespan of elves, Nanali was already over 100 years old, though she was comparable to an 18-year-old human. In less than a week, Linsea Oxy was already calling her sister Nana, and Nanali was slowly beginning to adapt to life on the blue planet, learning to use the microwave and trying her first bowl of noodles. She ate instant noodles for 3 days straight, and her only comment on the television was that the people of the blue planet trapped stories inside a box. She even used her natural powers to make Linsea Oxy's life flourish. Nanali embraced these small routines, which finally gave this cold, luxurious apartment the flavor of a real home. Then, one night, while he was handling work in the living room, Nanali came in from the balcony and asked if he was still awake, noting that he always seemed to have matters to attend to. Her green eyes stared at him intently as she noted that in the star world, he was a warrior, while here, he was a merchant, asking how long he would continue until it was all over. He wondered when that would be, perhaps when he defeated the planet's hollow systems, as strange rumors about the orchid and various legal bounties began to surface, showing the complexity of this grand game. It wasn't that the empathy promoted by others was lacking, but rather that reaching a decisive distribution seemed to be the only way to truly help those who were being preyed upon. As the day of the confrontation at the hotel approached, it became clear there was a deep division within the ranks. Regarding the organization, he remained silent for a long time, lost in his own thoughts. 1,000 rebirths, 1,000 battles fought in total solitude. He had already grown accustomed to enduring everything on his own, without relying on anyone else. But in that moment, looking into her green eyes, he suddenly felt something he hadn't expected. He realized that perhaps, this time, he didn't need to be alone anymore. Fine. He only said that one word, but it was enough to make Nanali smile. It was a smile without disguise, coming straight from the heart, and to him, it was more beautiful than the starry sky of the star world. But the good times did not last. Before the 9th trial, he received warnings from multiple fronts. High-ranking angels began to intervene, which changed the nature of the game entirely. In the previous trials, only low-ranking guide angels had appeared to lead the way. There were emissaries from the legacy realm, but starting from the 9th trial, the actual administrators of the trial appeared. They would ascend to become angels of sentence, beings of an incredibly high rank. Among the angelic hierarchy, they are surpassed only by the archangels themselves. The power of an angel of sentence far exceeds that of any mere emissary from the legacy realm. In the memories of his previous life, when one first appeared, it slaughtered over 10,000 trespassers. Even elite teams of level 7 or higher could barely stand their ground against such a force. Furthermore, his act of tearing through the dimensional channel had already been detected by these high-ranking angels. He warned her that they were watching, telling her to be careful whenever she went out. She insisted she could look after herself, though her presence was a constant weight on his mind. He wasn't questioning her ability, but before he could finish his thought, she acknowledged she understood. She interrupted him then, noting quite simply that he was worrying about her. He didn't deny it, but she countered by asking who was looking out for him. He claimed it wasn't necessary, but she saw through the lie as the 9th trial began exactly as scheduled. This time, a heavy sense of oppression filled the air, unlike anything we have seen before. A golden energy began to permeate the atmosphere, serving as the grim precursor to what was coming. It was the domain of judgment, the signature territory of an angel of sentence. The trial's requirements were unprecedented. The trespassers had to survive for 24 grueling hours. They were trapped in a massive labyrinth, facing constant high-level monsters and attacks from other desperate trespassers. The angel of sentence would appear randomly within the maze to judge whoever it deemed the strongest. And our protagonist had already killed a guide angel and defeated an emissary of the legacy realm. Combined with his tearing of the dimensional barrier, he was, to be honest, the most obvious target. He was, without a doubt, their primary target. Deep within the labyrinth, he managed to find a safe zone. It was a place where Nanali and the elven children could take temporary refuge. Martillo and Lang were there as well. During the previous trial, they had been forced to abandon the labyrinth. In the maze, he had been forced to leave the dwarven territory, taking his last apprentices with him. After wandering to this region, the old dwarf brandished his hammer and warned him that he was in deep trouble. The Angel of Judgment, he noted, simply cannot be compared to the garbage they faced before. Our protagonist knew this, of course, yet the old man was baffled that he would still throw himself into the fire. He explained that if he didn't act now, the next thing to come wouldn't be a mere Angel of Judgment. Across his 1,000 reincarnation memories, he knew that if he didn't eliminate the angel at this stage, whatever appeared afterward would be an even more terrifying existence. Since he was dealing with an angel, he decided to make the most of his time, using tracking skills to plot a plan. Soon, he understood the exact movement patterns of the Angel of Judgment. Next, he set a trap along the path the celestial being was forced to take. It wasn't a physical trap, mind you, but one built entirely on misinformation. He intentionally left traces of his own aura in various locations to lead the way. He was guiding the Angel of Judgment toward a specific area in the very depths of the labyrinth. It was a space containing an ancient seal, a place where monsters were imprisoned in the old world. Although the seal had weakened over time, its residual power could still interfere with an angel's divine energy. Once everything was ready, he entered that space alone to wait. And, just as he had expected, the Angel of Judgment arrived. This being was on a completely different level compared to the divine messenger of the kingdom. Golden armor covered its entire body, 6 wings unfurled from its back, and it held a glowing sword of judgment. Sinner, it declared in a cold, solemn voice, you have committed the following crimes: murdering a guide angel and defeating the divine messenger of the kingdom. Tearing the dimensional barrier on your own. According to divine law, you are hereby condemned to eternal annihilation. In the blink of an eye, that sword of judgment lunged toward our protagonist. His agility attribute was already pushed to its absolute limit, yet he barely managed to dodge the strike. The blade grazed his cheek, leaving a thin trail of blood behind. Had he fought head-on, even with the support of his Death Reaper and Judgment Rebellion titles, he would have been no match for it, but he was never one to fight a battle without ensuring victory first. Invoking Night of Death, he deployed the domain of night, and a sudden darkness devoured all light. The angel snorted with disdain, and its own domain of judgment began to strike back against the gloom. That radiant golden power tried its best to dissipate the surrounding darkness. Both domains clashed violently, and it was right at that moment that things got interesting. The residual ancient power within the sealed space finally activated. The force of the ancestral seal began to corrode the sacred energy of the Angel of Judgment. It was like acid eating through metal, causing the angel's voice to falter for the very first time. We see that this was the place where, in the ancient era, the natives of the new continent imprisoned monsters. And although the power of the seal had weakened over the centuries, it was still quite effective. As it turns out, it remains remarkably effective against divine beings. Did you think I chose this place by chance? He thought, as the angel's power was suppressed by at least 30%. But even so, the creature remained utterly terrifying. Every single strike of that judgment sword carried a power capable of destroying the world itself. He was quite literally dodging for his life, while the wounds on his body continued to multiply. After failing yet another dodge, the sword of judgment pierced straight through his left shoulder. A sharp, blinding pain clouded his vision for an instant, but he did not retreat. He activated Death Mark, increasing his damage output by 120%. Using Soul Harvest and Overload, he concentrated all his soul energy into the chain of spiritual vision. At the cost of mortgaging his future potential, he unleashed an instant burst of damage several times greater than normal. As a result, a pair of the angel's wings were cleanly severed from its back. The being let out a groan of agony, swinging its sword frantically as golden light illuminated the entire space. But under the double pressure of the seal and the domain of eternal night, its attacks grew weaker and weaker. Finally, the Angel of Judgment became an angel of death as the spiritual chain tore through its chest. And here we see the notification. Congratulations, you have defeated the Angel of Judgment. He rose 5 levels at once, obtaining a massive amount of gold coins and rare materials. He also received a new title, Enemy of the Gods, which, naturally, meant all of his attributes were permanently increased by 20%. To top it all off, he obtained the core of the Angel of Judgment. He fell to his knees, gasping for air, and who could blame him, really? There wasn't a single part of his body left intact, but he had one. Nanali was the first to reach him, her emerald eyes glistening with tears as she saw him covered in blood. He told her she was always there for him and urged her not to cry, insisting he was fine. I'm not crying, she replied, while using the power of nature to begin healing his wounds. Her fingers were trembling violently as she claimed that elves simply do not cry in front of strangers. He played along, telling her that since she wasn't crying, she shouldn't look at him that way. He repeated that it was all right and that he was okay, trying to soothe her. I am not crying, she insisted once more. But even so, he couldn't help but steal a quick glance at her face. A single tear rolled down her pale cheek and fell directly onto his open wound. It is said that the tears of an elf possess the power to heal the very wounds of the soul. He wasn't sure if it was just an illusion, but the pain truly did seem to fade away. This was the 10th trial, the most crucial one he had faced across his 1,000 reincarnations. In the memories of his previous life, he knew exactly what followed this specific test. The high-ranking angels would soon initiate a great purge across the blue earth. They would descend to eliminate every transmigrator who had managed to obtain significant power. If he didn't prepare properly this time, the blue earth would face its true apocalypse. The largest transmigrator organization had already begun secretly forming a combat unit of elite time travelers. Meanwhile, Suzian and Yukingwan took charge of managing the vast intelligence network. And we see that Yimingzu's guardian talent has finally ascended to its 3rd phase. This power was now capable of providing comprehensive buffs and shields to the entire team. Iron Hammer, we welcome you all to this new chapter. He had forged a new set of armor, created by fusing rare metals from the Singu world with the core of a judgment angel. Before them lay a dark gold-level curse rift. Baru took his place at the head of the Silver Wolf tribe warriors. Together, they formed an allied army with the other natives of the Singu world. Everything was ready, but the angels moved far faster than he had anticipated. The 10th trial was only just beginning, and already, cracks were appearing in the sky. There wasn't just one, but dozens of them, and from these rifts, 7 angelic thrones began to descend. In the memories of his previous life, the Great Purge had only ever sent 3 angelic thrones. But here we see dozens of rifts, and 7 angelic thrones descending upon the world. 7. He remembered clearly that in his past life, the Great Purge had only sent 3. This time, the number had more than doubled. He wondered if he had changed things too much. The butterfly effect had led to a completely different future. For the very first time, his precognition had failed him. All the information he had painstakingly accumulated over 1,000 reincarnations suddenly became unreliable. He couldn't help but wonder what was happening. But there was no time for doubt, as the combat erupted in an instant. Imuan led the elite troops forward to phase 2 of the angels head-on. Meanwhile, Su Xin and Yukingwen took command of the allied army of transmigrators. We see Yimingzu's shield expanding, casting its protective glow across the entire battlefield. As for our protagonist, he finds himself facing 3 angelic thrones all on his own. He deploys his domain with every ounce of his strength, drawing the scythe of death from the darkness. It carves arc after arc through the air, each strike carrying the grim power to harvest souls. However, the power of these angelic thrones far exceeds that of the judgment angels he faced before. Under their combined assault, the thrones shift their weight. Even at level 50, he cannot fully manage them. The wounds on his body begin to multiply, and his domain of eternal night starts to crumble under their pressure. Just then, a sudden flash of emerald green light erupts from the very edge of the battlefield. Innumerable vines burst from the earth, tangling themselves around the wings of one of the angelic thrones. He calls out to Nalani, telling her to leave, but she clearly has no intention of listening. She refuses to retreat, allowing the royal blood of the Qingling clan to explode with power. Her long silver hair, caught in the current of natural energy, turns a vibrant emerald green. She asks him if he truly thought she would abandon her comrades in the heat of battle. Her natural power manages to immobilize that angelic throne for 5 full seconds. And 5 seconds, as it turns out, is just enough time for him to strike down the other 2. But there is a price. As the 3rd throne breaks free, a light of judgment pierces directly through her. Time seems to stand still in that terrible, silent moment. He watches her body fall slowly, her silver hair returning to its original color as the power fades. Her emerald eyes find his, looking at him one last time. Her lips move slightly, whispering something as he desperately rushes toward her. And he catches her. Nalani, she smiles. It is a weak gesture, but one filled with an incredibly tender warmth. She whispers a plea, asking Linyu to promise her that he will live. She tells him she has always believed he was the one from the prophecy. Her eyes slowly close, and that emerald green light begins to fade away. It vanishes bit by bit, like the withering of the very last sacred tree in the world of Xinglu. In that moment, the memories of his 1,000 reincarnations begin to blur together. Only one emotion remains, a pure, uncontrollable rage rising from the depths of his soul. The scythe of death trembles violently in his hand, reacting to his fury. Every single engraving along the blade begins to glow with an eerie light. Spectral blue flames erupt from the edge, flickering with a ghostly hunger. All the energy he had accumulated through the harvesting of souls is summoned at once. It is released in a single instant, the ultimate awakening of his death talent. The gate of the underworld opens, and a thick darkness pours out from within him. This isn't the simple area of effect darkness we saw with his domain of eternal night. This is something deeper and far more terrifying, as if death itself were manifesting in this space. The gate of the underworld swings wide, tearing open a portal to the realm of the dead. Within the reach of this gate, every form of life must face the final judgment of death. Any living being with power inferior to that of death will be stripped of their life immediately. The angelic throne that killed Nalani feels the gate open, and its body begins to crumble instantly. He tries to flee in absolute terror, but the power of the gate of the underworld swings wide. The gate's overwhelming power traps him firmly, making any hope of escape impossible. Too late, the scythe of death sweeps past, and the angelic throne is reduced to nothing but ash. But the gate of the underworld possesses another ability, the soul seal. Under its power, the god of death can capture the souls of the fallen, sealing them away so they neither dissipate nor reincarnate. Lin Yu drives the chain of death into the ground and presses his hands together. Ghostly blue flames transform into thousands of silk threads, gently entwining themselves around Nolani's body. Her soul, a radiant emerald green orb, begins to rise slowly from her physical form. He reaches out his hand, holding her essence tenderly within his palm. Then, he seals her soul inside the core of the Angel of Judgment. Faint green veins begin to appear across the surface of the core. It pulses softly, as if the very heart of the earth were beginning to beat within it. He whispers for her to wait for him, hanging the core carefully over his chest. He keeps it close to his heart, then turns to face the remaining angels. Every single one of them, even the gods themselves, will be made to pay for this. After that brutal battle, the 7 angels were completely and utterly annihilated. The price, however, was devastating, with more than half of the allied crusaders wounded or dead. Inmohan was left gravely injured, and his companion, Su Xin, lost an arm in the fray. Yimingzu, having exhausted all his strength to maintain the shield, fell into a coma for 3 days and nights. But most importantly, Yimingzu had given everything for that shield, remaining unconscious for 3 full days. But the heaviest price of all was the core now hanging from his chest. It glowed with a faint green light, looking for all the world like a sleeping star. Upon his return to Blue Star, Lin Xiaoqi was there to meet him. She rushed forward and hugged him, asking if he was all right. The news reports had already begun to spread word that something terrible had happened. Then, she saw his expression, and she realized he wasn't the same man who had left. He wasn't cold or calm, but filled with a kind of emptiness she had never seen before. When she asked about Nana, he remained silent for a very long time. He told her she had simply fallen asleep for a while as Xiaoqi noticed the glowing core. Seeing it against his chest, she understood everything and chose not to ask another word. She simply held him tight, and in the days that followed, time seemed to stretch on forever. During that time, he dedicated every ounce of his energy to 2 specific goals. First, he sought to strengthen his power to prepare for the final battle against the gods. And second, he was determined to find a way to bring Nanali back to life. The soul seal, after all, was nothing more than a temporary solution. Her soul was preserved within the core, safe from dissipating, but she was far from truly alive. In the ancient texts of the Xinglu world, we find a legend regarding the seed of the Tree of Life. The sacred tree of the elven race had withered away hundreds of years ago. But it is said that, before it perished, it left behind a single seed. That seed contains the most primordial life force in the entire world of Xinglu. In theory, it can remake anything, but the catch, and it is a significant one, is that no one knows where the seed is. And so, he began a long, arduous search, looking through Xinglu during every trial, while completing missions and leveling up. In every single trial, alongside the necessary missions, he searched the world of Xinglu for even the smallest hint of its location. Tietue and Brother Lan helped him by making contact with the ancient archives of the dwarves. Li Yifeng and Balu even led him to the fabled land of longevity. Yejin provided several possible leads, but meanwhile, we see that the situation back on Blue Star was also changing rapidly. The organization of the Chosen had grown significantly stronger in the wake of the Great Purge. They declared that the Purge proved the Crusaders had to unite if they ever hoped to face the Angels. But their so-called union was nothing more than an attempt to establish a totalitarian regime run by Crusaders. Naturally, the Stars Group and Inmon's faction rose up to oppose the Chosen. The governments of various nations finally began to realize the true scale of the threat the Crusaders posed. In response, they started forming specialized agencies to deal with the growing crisis. However, when faced with absolute power, conventional military measures were almost entirely ineffective. By this point, his identity as the Black Runner had already been made public. He was a level 60 god of death, the man who had single-handedly defeated the angels. To both the Crusaders and the common people alike, he was considered one of the most powerful individuals of the modern era. The Chosen repeatedly sent people to test his strength, which, to be honest, was a terrible idea. His response was simple. He killed them one by one, leaving no trace behind. Throughout that entire time, Yamin Zhu remained faithfully by his side. She knew all about Nanali, and she was well aware that he held that core in his hand every single day. He would hold it close and whisper a few quiet words to the one who was still sleeping. One night, she found him in the living room, sitting quietly by the floor-to-ceiling window. She asked if he was all right, but then immediately corrected herself, knowing full well that he wasn't. She sat down beside him and confessed that, from the very first time they met, she felt he was different. To her, it seemed as though he knew everything and could foresee every possible outcome. And yet, she noticed that he never seemed truly happy, not even for a moment. She told him that she only saw him truly come alive when he allowed himself to simply be a person. And we see that, in those moments with Nanali, he actually smiles and cracks jokes. He even does useless things, like helping her repair her cave, which, let's be honest, wasn't strictly necessary. In those brief moments, she believed she was seeing the real him. Her voice was incredibly soft, as if she were afraid of disturbing a fragile piece. She admitted she knew Nanali held his heart, and she had known it from the very beginning. When he turned his head to look at her, Yaminju smiled, though her eyes were slightly red. She told him not to misunderstand, clarifying that this wasn't some grand confession of love. She simply wanted to tell him that she was certain he would find a way. After all, he was the man who had been reborn 1,000 times, wasn't he? He was the man who possessed the omnipotence of jade and the power of light itself. The truth almost slipped out of her then, but he pretended not to have heard it. He simply thanked her, leaving Minju to wonder what exactly he was thanking her for. She stood up and rubbed her eyes with force, trying to hide the evidence of her tears. She told him she would prepare some coffee, but as she entered the kitchen, a faint sob could be heard, though it was quickly muffled by the sound of the kettle. That night, he held the core close and spoke to it for a very long time. He asked Nanali if she could hear him, promising her that he would find the seed of the art of life. The core responded with a faint, emerald green glow, as if listening to his vow. And here we recall a memory from the 12th round of trials. This was the final one, the very round where he had first found that elusive seed. The clue had come from a most unexpected place, the abyss of the Novo world. We should note that the abyss is, without question, the most dangerous zone in that world. It is whispered that the abyss of the Novo world is a place of absolute peril. They say it is the scar left behind by God himself when he created the world. The most ancient and powerful creatures in existence make their home there. Even angels do not dare to set foot in it. Yet according to dwarven records, the sacred art of the elves withered away. It failed because its very roots extended down into that dark abyss. And so, the last seed of that sacred art lies buried in the deepest reaches of the pit. He entered the abyss alone. There is no light there, but for a god of death who masters the song of leaves. The darkness is his own territory, even if the creatures there are more terrifying than any other monsters. Giant shadow worms, abyssal golems, and void raiders lurk in every corner. Any one of them would be enough to annihilate a group of ordinary travelers in an instant. But he had already surpassed level 70, and his scythe of dead souls sliced through every obstacle in his path. The harvest of souls was constantly absorbing energy, fueling his strength with every strike. He grew stronger as the battle raged, and it was there, in the deepest reaches of the abyss, that he finally found it. A seed the size of a fist, emitting a faint emerald glow and encased in a layer of transparent crystal. The seed of the sacred art. He placed it carefully against his chest, shielding it from the darkness. By the time he returned to the surface, the elven children Nanali had once cared for had grown quite a bit. We see one of them, who should now be called Yi, standing before him. She was already capable of wielding natural forces all on her own, a remarkable feat, to be honest. She asked if he had found it, and he confirmed that he had, for the sake of their sister Nanali. When she asked if Nanali could wake up now, he promised it would be soon, as the ritual began at the boundary of the Novo world. This was the very spot where he had torn open the channel between dimensions. It is a place where the forces of two different worlds converge in a chaotic dance. And there stood Moan, right at the edge of that dimensional limit. He returned to the exact point where he had first breached the gap between worlds. The energies of both realms were swirling together here, creating the perfect conditions for what was to come. And we see them all gathered, Moan, Mukingwan, and Yaminzu. All of his companions had arrived. Tietue, Lanha, Liefin, Bilu, and Yang were all present. Their allies from the Novo world had also come to witness this pivotal moment. The elven children formed a circle, pouring their vital energy into the ritual through the power of nature. And then, with great care, he buried the seed of the sacred art into the earth. And then, he placed the core of the angel of judgment, the very thing sealing Nanali's soul, directly onto the seed. Finally, the gate of the underworld appeared, but this time, it wasn't there to take a life. Instead, it was meant to return one, as the power of the underworld began to operate in reverse. The flickering blue flames transformed into a soft, gentle radiance. Enveloping both the core and the seed, the sacred art began its miraculous germination. A small, emerald green tree sprouted from the earth before their very eyes. It grew with incredible speed, its branches and leaves emitting a comforting, warm light. As if embracing something precious, the emerald light within the core grew brighter and brighter. Then, it split open, and a figure made of pure light floated out from the rift. We watch as the luminous figure slowly began to solidify into a physical form. It took the shape of a body, crowned with shimmering silver hair. With pointed ears and skin so pale, it was almost translucent. The transformation was complete. It was Nanali. Her eyelashes trembled ever so slightly in the quiet air. And then, at long last, her emerald-colored eyes fluttered open. She looked around in confusion, whispering a soft "you," before looking down at her own hands. That was when she finally saw him, wondering aloud just how long she had been asleep. He told her it had been far too long, noting that she looked a little older now. She smiled, insisting she hadn't aged a day, that same gentle, ethereal smile he knew so well. She usually refused to cry in front of strangers, but in that moment, the tears simply began to fall.